Hello, good morning everybody. Today we will present our discussion about language and the brain. Our members are Nadya and Inayah. Hello, good morning everybody. Today we will present our discussion about language and the brain. Our members are Nadya and Inayah. Before we start our discussion today, let's see the table of content or the material that we will explain to you. You can open your book at page 242. The material consists of general brain structure and function, hemispheric structure and function, language areas and their function, right hemisphere language abilities, and then the bilingual brain, sign language, language disorders. Oh, and by the way, the deep explanation about language disorders will explain by the next presenters. So today we will only give you a brief explanation about it, and if you have questions about language disorders, you can keep your question to ask to the next presenters next week. And the last material is methods of investigating brain and language. Well, actually, this material is too high for linguistics students in undergraduate degree. So today, we only give you a brief explanation about it, so you can get a new knowledge about the methods of investigating brain and language. Well, let's jump to the next slide for general brain structure. You can see the illustration in the slide. Kalau di medis atau biologi, otak itu dibagi menjadi 3 bagian, yaitu the forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain. The first one is the forebrain. In forebrain, there is a part called as cerebrum, or we also known as the big brain. The cerebrum is the largest part of the human brain, and it is associated with higher brain function such as thought and action. It is divided into 4 sections called lobes. They are the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe, and the temporal lobe. You can see the illustration of the forebrain in the slide. Let's discuss one by one. The frontal lobe lies just beneath our forehead and is associated with our brain's ability to reason, organize, plan, speak, move, make facial expressions, serial tasks, problem solve, control inhibition, spontaneity, initiate, and self-regulate behaviors, pay attention, remember, and control emotions. The second one is the parietal lobe. It is located at the upper rear of our brain and controls our complex behaviors, including senses such as vision, touch, body awareness, and spatial orientation. It plays an important role in integrating sensory information from various parts of our body, knowledge of numbers and their relations, and in the manipulation of objects. The third one is the occipital lobe. It is located at the back of our brain and is associated with our visual processing such as visual recognition, visual attention, spatial analysis, and visual perception of body language such as postures, expression, and gestures. The last one is the temporal lobe. It is located near our ears and is associated with processing our perception and recognition of auditory stimuli, including our ability to focus on one sound among many, like listening to one voice among many at a party, comprehending spoken language, verbal memory, visual memory, and language production, including fluency and word finding, general knowledge, and autobiographical memories. The midbrain. The midbrain is the smallest region of the brain and is located most centrally within the cranial cavity. Midbrain consists of limbic system, thalamus, hypothalamus, amygdala, hippocampus, and pituitary gland. You can see of the illustration of the midbrain in the slide. Let's discuss one by one. The first one is the limbic system. The limbic system is often referred to as our emotional brain or childish brain. It is found buried within the cerebrum and contains the thalamus, hypothalamus, amygdala, and hippocampus. The second one is thalamus. The primary role of the thalamus is to relay sensory information from other parts of the brain to the cerebral cortex. The third one is hypothalamus. The primary role of the hypothalamus is to regulate various functions of the pituitary gland and endocrine activity, as well as somatic functions. The example, body temperature, sleep, appetite. The next one is amygdala. The primary role of the amygdala is to be a critical processor for the senses connected to the hippocampus. It plays a role in emotionally latent memories and contains a huge number of opiate receptor sites that are implicated in rage, fear, and sexual feelings. Then hippocampus. The primary role of the hippocampus is memory forming, organizing, and storing information. It is particularly important in forming new memories and connecting emotions and senses, such as smell and sound, to memories. And then the last one is pituitary gland. The primary role of the pituitary gland is an important link between the nervous system and the endocrine system. It releases many hormones which affect growth, metabolism, sexual development, and the reproduction system. The hindbrain. The hindbrain consists of cerebellum, pons, medulla, and brainstem. You can see the illustration of each part of the hindbrain in the slide. Let's discuss one by one. The cerebellum. The cerebellum, or little brain, is similar to the cerebrum with its two hemispheres and highly folded surface. It is associated with regulation and coordination of movement, posture, balance, and cardiac, respiratory, and vasomotor centers. The second one is brainstem. The brainstem is located beneath the limbic system. It is responsible for vital life functions such as breathing, heartbeat, and blood pressure. The brainstem is made of the midbrain, pons, and medulla. The third one is pons. The primary role of the pons is to serve as a bridge between various parts of the nervous system, including the cerebellum and cerebrum. And then the last one is medulla. The primary role of the medulla is regulating our involuntary life-sustaining functions such as breathing, swallowing, and heart rate.
After we learn about the hemisphere of the brains, we will jump to the next part, which is hemispheric structure and functions. This part is divided into three subtopics. Number 1, left and right hemisphere control opposite side of the body. Number 2, hemispheric dominance, consisting of the left hemisphere dominates the right, hand and foot preference, left-handers, sound preferences, and listening behind the closed door. And subtopic number 3 is lateralized hemispheric functioning, consisting of lateralization, left hemisphere specialization, right hemisphere specialization, and the split brain effects. The first subtopic that will be discussed is left and right hemispheres control opposite sides of the body. Brain has function to control the body by a division of labor. And here, the left hemisphere controls the right side of the body, including the move of the right hand, the right arm, and the right side of the face. And the right hemisphere controls the left side of the body. And for those who suffer from stroke or cerebral hemorrhage, a stroke in the right hemisphere of the brain will affect the left side of the body and vice versa. A person who suffers from stroke will lose control over the muscles in the left hand, left leg, and the left side of the face, including that side of the tongue and mouth. A stroke to the left part of the brain will similarly affect the right side of the body. In the opening part, we have a question related to the body preference. Now, I will explain to you about the hemispheric dominance. Typically, the left hemisphere dominates the right. The phenomenon where one hemisphere is the controlling one is called dominance. It can be seen in the example. If someone writes with the right hand, it means that the left hemisphere becomes the dominance. So, hemispheric dominance will control the body preference of a person, and typically, left hemisphere dominates the right. And it correlates to the hand and foot preference, where most people prefer the right hand and their right foot, which indicates that the left hemisphere dominates the right hemisphere. What about the left-handers? About 10% of the population worldwide are left-handed, but counter to the expectation, only about 30% of the left-handers have right hemisphere dominance. We already know that the work of each hemisphere is controlling the opposite side of the body. But in this case, it's only 30% of the left-handers have right hemisphere dominance, meaning that the rest of them have the left hemisphere dominance. And the lack of strong dominance for left-handers contribute to speech disorder, such as stuttering and dyslexia, which includes the reversal or minor imaging of the letters and words when reading or writing. Worldwide, there is a higher proportion of males who are natural left-handers than female because the effect of sexual hormones released in the brain during the development of the fetus. Now we move to the sound preferences. The two hemispheres specialize in processing these two types of sounds, which is speech and non-speech sound. The true right-handers will process the speech sound in the left hemisphere, while music, noises, and animal sounds are processed in the right hemisphere. There is an experiment by Kimura in 1961 that showed the true right-hander processed the speech sound in the left hemisphere. Kimura used dichotic listening, where the speech sounds were presented simultaneously to both ears. We can see in the picture, the left ear will hear the speech sound ba, and the right ear will hear the speech sound da. And the result shows that the speech sound da was perceived more strongly or dominantly. And now I will explain to you about the reason of the word da was perceived more strongly or dominantly. There is some notes stated that from each ear, a big bundle of fibers will cross over to the other hemisphere, while small bundle of fibers will go directly to the nearby hemisphere. And the left hemisphere is the main language hemisphere for true right-handers. So when the two sounds were presented simultaneously to both ears, those two bundles will work together. The word ba will go through the small bundle to the left hemisphere, and the word da will go through the small bundle to the right hemisphere. And why da is perceived more strongly is because the word da will go directly to the left hemisphere through a big bundle of fibers, while the word ba will go to the right hemisphere first and then reroute back to the left hemisphere. So this is why the word da is more perceived. The word da was perceived more strongly rather than the word ba. In the case of listening behind the closed door, it has the same concept as the experiment by Kimura, where if you are right-hander, the speech sounds are processed in the left hemisphere, and the first big impulse of speech sound will be transmitted to the left hemisphere from the right ear, and the first big impulse will precede and dominate any other big impulse. Now, we move to the subtopic number 3, which is lateralized hemispheric functioning. Each hemisphere has its own functions and structure, and lateralization is the separation of functions for each hemisphere. Some functions occur in one hemisphere, while other functions occur in other hemisphere. Incoming experiences are directed to the left or right hemisphere depending on the nature of those experiences, be they speech, faces, or sensations of touch. Here's some specializations of left hemisphere and right hemisphere. The left hemisphere has specialized in right side control, spoken and written language, numerical and scientific skills, and reasoning, while right hemisphere has functioned as left side control, musical and artistic awareness, space and pattern perceptions, insight, imagination, and generating mental image to compare spatial relationship. Left hemisphere is also specialized as the main language center, consisting of Broca's area, Wernicke's area, and angular gyrus. Broca's area and Wernicke's area are connected by the arcuate fasciculus. And left hemisphere is also concerned with language, logical analytical operations, and higher mathematics. Right hemisphere specializations involves in recognizing emotions, recognizing faces, and perceiving the structures of things globally without analysis. It also deals with music, non-linguistic sounds such as noises, and animal sounds. If the area of brain that deals with faces is damaged, the person will not be able to recognize the faces of people, even close family, and even the person's own face when looking into a mirror. And the patients with right hemisphere damage have difficulty in apprehending syntactic distinction. The next part is split brain effects. Sperry, 1982, separated two hemispheres of the brain by severing the connection tissue, the corpus callosum, of a number of patients. This is done for extreme cases of epilepsy. After surgery, with the corpus callosum no longer intact, information no longer flowed from hemisphere to hemisphere as it does in normal persons. And the findings are, the person could still use speech and writing in the disconnected left hemisphere, but the right hemisphere had little such capacity. When tactile or touch information passed to the left hemisphere, split brain patients were completely capable of verbally describing objects and talking about things they had just touched. If touching experience passed only in the right hemisphere, they couldn't talk or describe about the experience at all. The right hemisphere in general was also incapable of imagining the sound of a word, even a familiar one, and patients failed simple rhyming tests such as determining by reading which word pie or key rhymes with B. And the last finding is that the right hemisphere is still good at spatial tasks such as matching things from their appearance. After we learn about brain controls the body and the lateralizations, we move to the next big topic, which is language areas and their functioning. First, I will explain to you about the Broca's area, the motor area, and the speech production. Pierre-Paul Broca was a French pathologist and neurosurgeon in 1842 up to 1880, who found the area that is involved in production of speech, which later called as Broca's area. Broca noted that the speech area is adjacent to the region of the motor cortex that controls the movement of the muscles of the articulators of speech, the tongue, lips, jaw, soft palate, vocal cords, and etc. He posited that speech is formulated in Broca's area and then articulated via the motor area. And the link between Broca's area and the motor area is called arcuate fasciculus. So the speech production process would begin in Broca's area, pass on through the arcuate fasciculus to the motor area, and from there to the articulators of speech for vocalizations. Now we move to the Wernicke's area, the auditory area, and the speech understanding. When Broca's area is concerned with the speech production, Wernicke's area is concerned with speech understanding. Karl Wernicke, a German neurologist, 1848 up to 1905, found the area that was involved in the understanding of speech, which is called Wernicke's area. According to Wernicke, on hearing a word, the sound of a word goes from the ear to the auditory area and then to the Wernicke's area. And it is from Broca's area that the vocalization of speech would then be activated. According to Wernicke, when a word is read, the information goes from the eyes to the visual area of the cortex in the occipital lobe, and from there to the angular gyrus, then to the Wernicke's area, and then to the Broca's area, which causes the auditory form of the word to be activated. Even though most language processes occur in Broca's area, Wernicke's area, and angular gyrus, there are some parts of left hemisphere which also involve in language process, and it is varied, starting from understanding the meaning of intonation such as rising tone for a question, interpret emotional intentions such as anger or sarcasm, and appreciate social meanings from something such as whispering. The cerebellum and basal ganglia is also concerned as subcortical nuclear systems for the regulation of motor function. After we know that language process mainly happen in the left hemisphere, we have the next questions. Is it possible for right hemisphere to take over the language process? And the answer is yes. While the left hemisphere is involved in most language tasks, recent evidence indicates that the right hemisphere too is involved in language processing. The right hemisphere is critical for understanding discourse. Patients with right hemisphere damage have impairments concerning narrative script, interpretation, integration of information or conceptualization of the unit as a whole, construction of new conceptual models, and inference about another person's beliefs and intentions. The right hemisphere has an ability to use knowledge of the world involved in scripting, where a number of sentences are related to a topic. Patients who have damage in their right hemisphere show structuring problems in story recall, and their speech is disrupted, particularly at the level of discourse, jumping from one topic to another incoherently. Moving to the next subtopic, which is the right hemisphere can take over left hemisphere functions. The brain is able to readjust its circuits to process language in case normal processing cannot occur. For example, brain scans reveal that blind persons receive verbal communication help from the brain areas that normally process visual and touch information inside people. And the damage to language areas in the left hemisphere of young children makes the right hemisphere taking over the reacquisition of language, and this sometimes happens to adults as well. Here are some case studies that prove the right hemisphere can take over left hemisphere functions. Case study number 1 was coming from a boy named BL, aged 5.5 years, who had his entire left hemisphere removed or hemispherectomy because he suffered right side seizures. Before the surgery, BL has poor intelligibility. And 4 months after the surgery, at the age of 6, BL's speech improved to normal. When tested 21 years later, he showed normal language and intellectual capacities. BL attended regular elementary and high school and graduated from college with a bachelor's degree with a double major in business and sociology. At present, BL's performance appears to be normal in pronunciation, grammar, semantics, and usage, also with some deficits in production of phonemically complex words and in comprehension of linguistic contrasts in prosody. Case study number 2 was coming from a boy named Alex who had a hemispherectomy at the age of 8.5 years. It is reported that before the surgery, his language ability is equivalent to a 3 up to 4-year-old. He suddenly began to acquire language when he was 9 years old, attaining with the right hemisphere alone a level of language abilities equivalent to an 8 or 10-year-old after about 5 years. There are reports of a significant recovery of language skills in 3 patients 10 years after stroke and in some bilingual and multilingual patients. From those 2 case studies, we can conclude that the right hemisphere is often capable to taking over typical left hemisphere functions, even after the entire left hemisphere has been removed.
The bilingual brain. Recent neurolinguistic research has shown growing interest in how bilinguals represent different languages in the brain. 2 central issues have been the focus of research: whether different languages are represented in the different hemispheres of the brain, and if the age at which a second language is learned is related to lateralization. Some studies report that there are greater involvement of the right hemisphere in bilinguals than in monolinguals. Albert and Opler argue that the right hemisphere plays a major role in the learning of a second language even in adulthood. Their position is based partly on the finding that aphasia is more likely to be found following right hemisphere lesion in bilinguals than in monolinguals. If the right hemisphere is damaged and aphasia results, then they argue that the location of the second language must be in the right hemisphere. On the other hand, a number of studies have reported no difference in lateral dominance for the first and the second language. They reported that no evidence found the right hemisphere being involved more in the initial stages of informal adult second language acquisition. All in all, the right hemisphere's difficulties are involved in so many studies suggest the distinct possibility that a second language sometimes located in the right hemisphere and sometimes not. There may be variables that determine hemispheric location, but these have not been identified yet. One such factors may be the age at which the second language was learned. Language disorders. Language disorders, also known as aphasia. Aphasia, also defines as a language deficit caused by damage to the brain, often be a stroke or an accident, or maybe tumor or cancer. Such damage causes characteristic problems in speech, as well as in reading and writing. Benson and Patton classified aphasia into 2 groups. They are Broca's aphasia and Wernicke's aphasia. But actually, there are so many aphasia in the world, like global aphasia, and then reading aphasia, and sign language aphasia. Broca's aphasia. Broca's aphasia is a loss of syntactic knowledge in both speech production and understanding the language. You can read the example below. Wernicke's aphasia. This condition is characterized by speech which often resembles what is called nonsense speech or double talk. It sounds right and is grammatically correct, but is meaningless. It can seem so normal that the listener thinks that he or she has, as is often the case in ordinary conversation, somehow misheard what was said and therefore didn't understand it. Patients with pharynx aphasia also commonly provide substitute words for the proper one that the basis of similar sounds, association, or other features. Dyslexia. The type of aphasia which involves disorders in reading and writing is called dyslexia. The characteristics are lack of fluency and speed in reading, hesitant predictive reading using context, hesitancy in reading, failing to recognize words, low level of comprehension, and difficulty using dictionaries. Sign language aphasia. Native signers of American Sign Language who have suffered trauma such as stroke to the left hemisphere will purchase sign language equivalents of Broca's aphasia or Wernicke's aphasia. On the other hand, signers who have suffered damage to the right hemisphere generally do not display aphasia symptoms in the production of signs. Localism and holism. The localist model is the particular model of looking at the structure and function of language by relating specific aspects of language to certain localized area of the brain. Although it is true that certain areas of the brain are involved in language, it is also necessary to take into account holistic or global brain phenomena in order to understand the effect on language of broader psychological factors such as attention span, motivation, alertness, the rate at which auditory and visual memory traces dissipate. Jadi di localism and holism itu intinya bagaimana kita mempelajari brain secara keseluruhan di lokal, baik secara lokal maupun secara global. Secara lokal itu maksudnya kita mempelajari tentang the brain structure and the function, atau secara global yaitu nanti relating to the psychological factors, for example, seperti itu. Methods of investigating brain and language. Nanti ada dua metode, yaitu traditional method sama high-tech method. Let's discuss one by one. The first one is traditional methods, including post-mortem examination, brain-injured people, and electrical stimulation. Post-mortem examination used by Broca to examine the brain of patients who faced language disorders while they are alive. And then brain-injured people, it investigating the language used by brain-injured patients, and then electrical stimulation of the cerebral cortex in patients who are conscious during the brain operation. High-tech method. The first one is the CAT scan. It using an X-ray. Images slice of the static brain and integrated them into a whole by computer, allows for the direct observation of activity in the brain. And then the PET scan injects radioactive substance in the blood and then traces the blood flow patterns within the brain. The third one is magnetic and functional magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI and fMRI. Measure brain function by taking advantages of the increased local blood flow in area of the brain that is active. Cellular activity is measured through a magnetic field that tracks protons in the bloodstream. The last one is event-related potentials, or ERPs. Measures voltage changes in the brain by EEG, where such changes are related to sensory, motor, or cognitive sense.